Heart story. Even in quiet moments, life whispers its secrets. In a quiet neighborhood of Willow Creek, a retired veteran named George sat alone in his weathered armchair, staring at a framed photo of his late wife, Margaret. The old house creaked under the weight of memories, each corner filled with relics of a life once shared. George had lived here for over 50 years, watching the seasons change, the town evolve, and the world grow more distant. His hands, once steady from years of military service, trembled slightly as he reached for his morning cup of coffee. The attic had been calling to him for days, a nagging whisper in his mind suggesting that something forgotten was waiting. Today, he finally decided to climb the narrow stairs and see what it was. Each creak of the steps echoed like a drumbeat of the past, urging him forward into the shadows above. George's knees ached as he reached the top of the narrow staircase, blinking against the dim light filtering through the attic window. Dust danced lazily in the shafts of sunlight, and the air smelled faintly of cedar and age. He glanced around at the clutter, boxes labeled with dates long forgotten, Margaret's childhood toys, his old army gear packed away in canvas duffels. His gaze settled on a wooden chest tucked in a corner, its brass hinges tarnished but still intact. With effort, he dragged the chest into the center of the attic and lifted the lid. Inside, beneath layers of yellowed newspapers and fragile letters tied with faded ribbon, lay a small, unassuming envelope. George's breath caught. The handwriting, though shaky and faint, seemed familiar. The envelope was marked simply "For someone who cares." His pulse quickened as he gently picked it up, the attic's silence deepening around him. George held the envelope delicately between his fingers, as though it might crumble from the weight of years. Slowly, he broke the seal and unfolded the brittle paper inside. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible, written with the careful hand of someone determined to be remembered. It was a letter addressed to a friend, describing a young soldier's gratitude for the kindness of the townspeople during his brief time stationed there. The letter spoke of shared meals, warm conversations, and promises to return once the war was over. George's hands trembled as he realized the letter was likely from someone who never made it back. His heart tightened. How could something so deeply personal have been lost in the attic all these years? He folded the letter carefully, its significance already taking root in his mind, hinting at a story that was far from finished. George sat at his worn kitchen table, the letter spread out before him, the morning light filtering through the window. He read it again, each word settling heavier than before. The signature at the bottom, Billy Thompson, sent a shiver down his spine. That name stirred something deep in his memory. Years ago, he'd heard murmurs of a young soldier named Billy who'd been stationed briefly in Willow Creek during World War II. According to town gossip, Billy had been a quiet, kind soul who made friends easily, but he was tragically killed overseas, never returning to the promises he made. George traced his fingers over the lines of the letter, imagining the young man's voice echoing through the decades. He felt a pull, a responsibility to share this story with someone, to give Billy's memory the recognition it deserved. The letter's words were no longer just ink, they were a plea. Determined to learn more, George rummaged through his old belongings, hoping to find a clue connecting him to Billy. After an hour of searching, he found a faded photograph tucked in the back of a dusty scrapbook. The photo depicted a group of young soldiers in uniform standing in front of the town's now abandoned train station. One face, barely visible, bore the same earnest look George imagined from the letter. He turned the photo over, revealing a scribbled date, June 1944, and the names of a few men, including Billy Thompson. George's heart beat faster. This wasn't just a forgotten letter, it was a forgotten piece of the town's history. He felt an overwhelming urge to bring this story to light, to remind Willow Creek of a young man whose life, though brief, had touched so many. The attic's silence seemed to hum with unseen possibilities. George gently placed the photograph next to the letter, feeling an invisible thread linking them across time. He wondered how many people in Willow Creek remembered Billy, if any at all. The thought of such a story fading into obscurity filled him with a deep sense of urgency. He recalled the old-timers' tales from his younger days, whispers of a kind-hearted soldier who never made it home. Yet no one had ever mentioned the letter or Billy's promise to return. George's mind raced with questions. Who else might know the full story? How had the letter ended up hidden away in his attic? And what role could he play in finally giving Billy the honor he deserved? The quiet ticking of the kitchen clock was the only sound in the room as George resolved to uncover the truth. He knew the first step was revisiting old town records. The next morning, George made his way to the small town library, his breath forming faint clouds in the crisp air. The librarian, a kind woman named Helen who'd known George for years, welcomed him with a warm smile. "Morning, George. What brings you in today?" she asked. George explained his discovery of the letter and photograph, watching as curiosity brightened Helen's eyes. "Billy Thompson," she murmured, flipping through a dusty, leather-bound volume of town archives. Together, they found a brief mention of Billy in an old newspaper clipping. It described a farewell gathering held before Billy's deployment, noting his kindness and the affection the townspeople felt for him. The article hinted at a sense of loss the town had quietly buried. George's heart ached with the realization that Billy's story had been reduced to a few lines in history, but now he was determined to bring it back to life. Helen led George to a storage room in the back of the library where old photographs and local memorabilia were kept. As they sifted through the dusty boxes, they uncovered a photo of a community picnic held in the summer of 1944. Billy stood near the center, laughing with a group of townspeople. The image captured a rare moment of joy amidst the war's shadow, and George couldn't help but smile as he imagined Billy's presence there. Helen pointed out a note scribbled on the back of the photo. "Billy, the heart of the picnic, 1944. George felt a surge of determination. If the town had once embraced Billy, surely it could again. The story was bigger than just a forgotten letter. It was a legacy waiting to be revived. He knew he couldn't do it alone, and he needed to find others who remembered. As Helen packed away the photo, She mentioned an elderly man named Mr. Jenkins who might know more about Billy. George remembered Mr. Jenkins as a local historian who had lived in Willow Creek for over 80 years. Determined, George made his way to the modest house at the end of Main Street, where the old man sat on his porch sipping tea. George, Mr. Jenkins greeted, squinting against the morning light. "Haven't seen you in a while." George explained his discovery of Billy's letter and photograph, watching Mr. Jenkins' expression turn thoughtful. "Billy Thompson," he said softly. "He was one of the good ones. Helped my family during hard times. Always said he'd be back, but he never made it home." George's heart ached at the quiet reverence in Mr. Jenkins' voice. He realized the story wasn't just about a letter, it was about honoring a promise. That evening, George sat at his kitchen table, pen in hand, as he carefully crafted a note about Billy's story. He wrote about the letter's discovery, Billy's kindness, and his promise to return. He made copies and pinned them to the community board at the post office, the grocery store, and even the old church bulletin board. Though unsure if anyone would notice, George felt a sense of duty. He included his phone number, inviting anyone with memories of Billy to reach out. As he placed the final note on the church's board, he couldn't help but glance up at the fading sky. The sun dipped low, casting a golden hue over Willow Creek, and George felt a quiet hope rising. He whispered, "Billy, your story's not forgotten." His heart felt lighter, knowing he'd taken the first step to bring the past back into the town's present. Within a few days, George's phone began to ring with calls from curious townspeople. Some shared vague memories of Billy as a kind young man who helped around town during his brief stay. Others admitted they'd heard stories from their parents or grandparents but had never known the full details. One call, however, stood out. A local reporter named Sarah Jenkins, intrigued by the story, requested an interview with George. She wanted to feature Billy's story in the town newspaper's upcoming edition. George agreed, and they arranged to meet at his home. When Sarah arrived, she listened intently, taking notes as George recounted his discovery and the memories others had shared. As she closed her notebook, she smiled. "This story deserves to be told," she said softly. George nodded, his resolve strengthening. Billy's story was gaining momentum, and it was only just beginning. After Sarah left, George sat by his window, watching the town settle into the quiet of evening. He could almost hear Billy's laughter echoing from the past, blending with the soft sounds of the neighborhood. The newspaper article appeared 2 days later, featuring a photo of Billy from the old picnic and a heartfelt retelling of his story. It quickly sparked conversations around town, at the diner, the grocery store, and even at church. People shared stories they'd heard or memories they'd nearly forgotten. Billy's name was on everyone's lips, and George felt a deep sense of pride. But more importantly, he sensed a shift in Willow Creek. The town, which had once buried its past, was now awakening to its own history. And George knew that Billy's story, though long hidden, was finally finding its way into the hearts of his neighbors. The day after the article was published, George's phone rang early in the morning. It was the town council requesting to meet with him at the community hall. When George arrived, he was surprised to find a gathering of townspeople waiting, including veterans, teachers, and high school students. The council explained that they had been moved by the story and wanted to organize a town-wide remembrance event for Billy. They envisioned a ceremony in the park, complete with a memorial plaque to honor him. George, humbled by the response, agreed to help lead the planning. His heart swelled with pride as he realized that a single forgotten letter had ignited a wave of community spirit. As plans for the event took shape, he couldn't help but imagine Billy standing tall and smiling, finally being recognized for the kindness and courage he'd shown decades ago. As word of the memorial event spread, more people came forward with stories about Billy. An elderly man named Frank recounted how Billy had helped fix his family's roof after a storm, refusing any payment. A woman named June remembered her mother's tale of Billy bringing firewood during a harsh winter. Even the local high school students, inspired by the newspaper story, decided to dedicate their history project to Billy's life and legacy. George was amazed at how the once forgotten soldier was now becoming a symbol of kindness and community resilience. At every turn, new details painted a vivid picture of Billy's generous spirit, making him more than just a name in a letter. As the town's excitement grew, George felt a deep sense of connection not just to Billy, but to everyone coming together to honor him. It was as if the past was finally being made right. As the memorial plans took shape, George received a call from a local artist named Carla, who had read about Billy's story. She offered to create a mural in the town square depicting Billy's life and legacy. George was touched by her gesture and immediately agreed, suggesting the mural include scenes of Billy helping townspeople and his handwritten promise from the letter. Carla's enthusiasm was contagious, and soon volunteers from all over Willow Creek joined in to help prepare the wall. George marveled at how the simple act of finding a forgotten letter had blossomed into a town-wide effort to honor a hero. Standing near the wall, he imagined Billy's spirit watching over them, perhaps nodding in quiet approval. The mural, George knew, would not just celebrate one man's story, it would symbolize the heart of the entire community. And the best was still to come. The morning of the memorial dawned crisp and bright, with a gentle breeze stirring the leaves in Willow Creek's town square. George arrived early, dressed in his neatly pressed veteran's uniform, the letter from Billy carefully tucked into his pocket. Townspeople began gathering, many carrying flowers or small tokens of remembrance. The mural Carla had created now stood proudly, its vibrant colors telling Billy's story with grace and dignity. As the crowd grew, George felt a swell of emotion. He saw children he'd once taught, old friends, and new faces all coming together to honor a man they'd never met, yet felt they knew. When the mayor approached and shook George's hand, she whispered, "This is because of you." But George shook his head softly, his eyes shining. "No," he said, "this is because of Billy." And with that, he stepped toward the podium to begin the ceremony. As the gathered townspeople quieted, George cleared his throat and unfolded Billy's letter. His voice, though slightly unsteady, carried through the square as he read Billy's words aloud. The letter spoke of gratitude, of finding warmth and kindness in Willow Creek, and of the promise to return and repay that kindness. The sincerity in Billy's words struck a chord with everyone present. There were gasps and tears as the significance of the letter became clear, not just as a personal message, but as a testament to the town's enduring spirit. As George finished reading, a hush settled over the crowd. For a moment, it felt as if Billy himself stood among them, his presence as real as the autumn breeze. Then, softly, applause began to build, growing louder until the square echoed with appreciation. George folded the letter gently, his heart full of gratitude and pride. After the applause quieted, an elderly man slowly made his way to the front of the crowd. He introduced himself as Samuel, a fellow veteran who had served with Billy during the war. With a voice thick with emotion, Samuel shared a story no one had heard before. Billy had once risked his life to save Samuel during an ambush, dragging him to safety while under fire. Samuel, eyes brimming with tears, admitted he had always regretted not being able to thank Billy properly. Now, thanks to George and the town, he finally could. His words added a profound layer of meaning to the day's events, bringing a deeper sense of closure to Billy's story. As Samuel embraced George, the townspeople cheered, united by a shared respect for Billy's sacrifice and the kindness that had bound their community together. In the days following the memorial, Willow Creek transformed into a place alive with renewed spirit. The once quiet streets now bustled with neighbors greeting one another, sharing stories of Billy, and expressing gratitude for the reminder of what true kindness looked like. The mural, completed with Billy's image and his handwritten promise, became a gathering place for residents. Families visited to take photos, while children placed flowers at its base. The local school organized a kindness week, inspired by Billy's story, encouraging students to perform small acts of compassion. George often walked by the mural, nodding to those who had also come to pay their respects. Though he still missed his wife deeply, the sense of purpose and connection he felt now filled a space in his heart that had long been empty. He realized that Billy's story had united the town in a way no one expected. Inspired by the mural and the memorial, the town council proposed renaming one of the main streets Billy's Way to honor his memory. The motion passed unanimously, and within days, new street signs were installed. George attended the ceremony, standing proudly among neighbors as the mayor unveiled the sign, its bold letters gleaming under the afternoon sun. The town's children cheered, and an elderly resident softly played taps on a bugle, the notes lingering in the air. George felt a quiet satisfaction as he glanced around the crowd. Billy's story, once hidden away in an attic, had not only been revived but had inspired an entire town to celebrate the power of gratitude and kindness. As the ceremony concluded, George thought of Billy's letter and knew that its words would continue to echo through the hearts of Willow Creek's residents for generations to come. In the weeks that followed, George noticed how the spirit of kindness seemed to ripple through Willow Creek. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves now lent a hand to one another. Volunteers organized community cleanups, and local businesses collaborated to support those in need. At the diner, George overheard teenagers sharing stories of Billy's bravery and kindness. Even the smallest gestures, like offering a smile or holding a door, felt more meaningful. George often found himself standing in front of Billy's mural, reflecting on how a single forgotten letter had sparked such a profound change. He thought of Margaret, his late wife, and imagined her smiling down, proud of how her husband had carried forward a message of hope. As George watched the sunset behind the mural, he whispered softly, "We did it, Billy." We remembered. One crisp morning, George found an envelope in his mailbox with no return address. Inside was a letter from Billy's family, written in careful, flowing script. They expressed deep gratitude for how Willow Creek had honored their son's memory and for George's dedication to bringing his story to life. Reading the letter, George felt a lump in his throat. He carefully placed it next to Billy's original letter in a wooden frame, setting it on his mantel where he could see it every day. Whenever he passed by, he would pause to reread the words, remembering not only Billy's promise but also the community's newfound spirit. He knew that Billy's story was no longer just about one man, it was about the entire town's ability to come together, to heal, and to find hope. And that legacy would live on long after the letters faded. Shortly after receiving the letter from Billy's family, George was invited to speak at the local high school's annual assembly. The students had been inspired by Billy's story and wanted George to share more about the man whose memory had sparked a movement. Standing before the auditorium, George felt a surge of pride and humility. He spoke about Billy's kindness, his bravery, and his promise to return. He reminded the students that simple acts of kindness like a smile, a helping hand, or a letter could leave lasting impressions on those around them. As he finished, the room erupted in applause, and several students approached him to thank him personally. Walking out of the school that day, George realized that Billy's story wasn't just a story from the past, it was a call to action, a reminder that everyone had the power to make a difference, no matter how small. As George walked home from the high school, he paused by Billy's mural, now adorned with fresh flowers and handwritten notes from townspeople. He ran his fingers gently along the painted words of Billy's letter, feeling a deep connection to both the past and the present. Looking around, he saw children playing, neighbors laughing, and the community united in a way he hadn't seen in years. The sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over Willow Creek. George smiled softly, whispering to himself, "Heart story. We did it, Billy. You're finally home." He knew that Billy's legacy would continue to inspire acts of kindness for generations to come. As he turned to walk back to his house, George felt an unshakable sense of peace, knowing that he had helped restore a piece of history and in doing so, had helped heal his town. Light bulb, if you loved this story, hit like and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Stay tuned for the next story.